Okay, so today's goal is to build an app, a web for, or a Windows form app that will be able to connect to our same database that we used the last time around for flight information and be able to display information. But this time, instead of using the connected model, we're going to use the disconnected model. So our first step is to just jump right into it, and we're going to build a new project. And it'll be a Windows form application. We'll call it disconnected 1, and we'll give it a home. So it's going to generate a new project for us. Alright, what we're going to do first is we're going to start off by designing our Windows form. We'll take a similar approach to what we did last class, but maybe slightly different. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. So first thing we're going to do here is just stretch out our form, make a lot of space here for us to work with, and then we're going to bring over a few labels. We'll start off with some labels. Alright, so I'm going to put a label there. I'm just going to do a copy paste, so Control C, Control V. Alright, so another one. And one more. Alright, so we have our 4 labels to depict our 4 characteristics in the flight table. So the first one will be airline. Second one will be flight number. Third one will be destination. And last one will be airplane type. The first 3 will be text boxes, and the last one will be a combo box, just like we did last time around. So we'll start by looking for some text boxes to put next to the first 3. Alright, so put something here, stretch it out a bit. I'll just do copy and paste for the other 2. There. And then we'll bring in a couple of combo boxes. I'm going to put one next to airplane type. And I'm going to take another one, just copy and paste, and maybe I'll put it up here. So this combo box will represent the different airplanes, right, that we're going to have, but this one will represent selecting our previous entries and being able to update the airline, flight number, destination, and so on. Right, so that's the purpose of that. So let's finish off adding the rest of our items here. So we need to add some buttons now. So we're going to add 4 buttons. So just going to copy and paste. Alright, And maybe align that a bit better. There. And then the last thing we need is a grid view down here. Well, we'll come back to the grid view last because we're going to start by getting some data right into the grid view, so we'll add that last. First thing we're going to do is just label everything, right? So we don't need any labels for our labels because they're fine, but let's start with this comma box at the top. I'm going to call this CMB flight. It'll have our different flights there, right? I'll match it up a bit there. This first text box will be TB airline. Second one will be TB flight. Third, TB destination. Last one is a combo box, so CMB airplane. And then the next thing would be the buttons. So this will be BTN. Well, before we get into what this is, let's actually label the buttons first. So we'll start with button 1, then we'll understand what we're labeling here. So I'm going to call this one, I'm going to say update users. The intention of this button is to load a new form that'll have same idea text boxes and a grid view, and you'll be able to manipulate the users from the disconnected perspective in its own form. So you're going to launch that form from update users, right? So next one will just be add new. All right. Third one will be update. And last one will be delete. All right, so let's give IDs to each of our buttons. So this first one at the top will be BTN BTN users. Second will be BTN add. Third one, BTN update. And fourth one, BTN delete. And I'm going to double click on add, update, and delete to generate their event handlers. And delete. So we have all three of our event handlers auto-generated here. Okay, so we've got our GUI in place. All right, so we have all of our text boxes properly named. So I'll just pick on one just to verify. You know, TB flight, yeah. So we got everything here. We don't need event handlers for these. Right? We could add an event handler for this first comma box. We'll see if there's time. We'll do it afterwards. But right now our next job is to get a data grid view to display here. So we're going to dig into our toolbox and we're going to look for a data grid view. And we're going to do something a bit different with this data grid view. I'm going to stretch it out to the end. And we'll talk about the little window here in the corner that pops up to help us to design or configure this data grid view. And up until now, what we've been doing is we've been leaving the data source alone. We've been hard coding all the information behind the scenes, right? But today we're going to take a different approach and actually let Visual Studio do the work for us. So the first thing we're going to do is go to choose data source, and we're going to say add project data source. All right? When we say add project data source, this window pops up. It says choose a data source type. So this is the data source configuration wizard window. This pops up, very convenient. So we configured our data sources in the connected model by hand because we created a method that would actually do the select for us, go into the database, retrieve the data, use a data reader to configure it and get it ready for the data grid view. But now this window is going to do all that work for us. So we're going to say database because we're dealing with the database there, and we're going to use DataSet, and we need to provide a connection to it. We need to tell it where we're going to connect to, what database, right? Where in the world is the database engine, and so on. So we're going to hit New Connection, and it's going to pop this window up called Add Connection. You may have another window pop up that says select. Choose data source. Let's see if I can find it. Here we go. Yeah, under change. So you get a window like this actually, right? And you may have this checked off to say always use this selection, which popped up the other window that I had, which we'll come back to in a sec. So basically, you're just choosing what database engine to use. We're choosing Microsoft SQL Server. The other options are Microsoft Access, ODBC, Oracle, or other. Just choose Microsoft SQL Server. The one below it you have to be careful of, Microsoft SQL Server database file, is for when you have the database as a file. So you can export your database as an MDB file, which you can then use as like a local database file. It's not what we're going for here. We're going to have a proper database engine that we're going to connect to and work with. So Microsoft SQL Server is sufficient, and we're going to hit OK, and then this window will pop up. So add connection. Now, for add connection, you could just hit the drop down, let it try and figure it out for you, right? And in my case, you're going to provide my computer name. This could get tricky for you if you have to put in like /SQL Express, right? Something like that you may have to do, or basically what needs to be provided here in the server name. The easiest thing to do is you just go back to SQL Management Studio, get your server name from the login window like we did last week, paste that into here. That's the best thing to do, right? Well, basically your server name has to go here, and authentication will be we're going to use SQL Server authentication, and so SQL Server authentication. You'll provide your username and password here. So in my case, it was Jim Gordon with Batman as the password. I'm going to hit Save My Password, and then I'm going to choose database name. Net class is the database that I'm going to be using. So you want to choose the correct database name that you have here. And then you can test the connection. Test connection successful. You can go ahead and hit OK. So this window may or may not have these radio buttons enabled. If these aren't enabled, you didn't check off Save Password in the previous window. But I said Save Password, so it's telling me that, hey, this is some sensitive information we're trying to save here, basically our password. Because it's just a small time exercise here, we're just going to say yes, include the sensitive data in my connection string. It's not a safe thing to do, but we'll just for our small little purposes here. We'll hit Next. Now, this connection string is auto-generated for us. So the connection string we had to write by hand last class. And this time around, we're having this program auto-generate it for us. And so we're going to give it a name called Net Class Connection String. All right? And we'll hit Next. And now it's trying to retrieve the database information. And if I expand tables here, I'll see flight info, user info. So it actually can see my database tables. It's great. So I'm just going to check off everything. I'm going to take everything here. Views, stored procedures, functions. We don't have any of these things, but let's just take it anyway. Right? Why not, right? And you know, who knows? We may change things later on, right? So we want to have it all. All right, so then we'll hit finish. And it's giving us a name, dataset name, net class dataset. So it's actually automatically generated a dataset for us. Now we'll go through the motions right now of generating one by hand because it's a convenient thing to know, to understand. You should have this thing called netClassDataset.xsd or whatever your database's name is .xsd. Okay, so it auto-generated this for us. Right now, what we'll do is we'll finish this off. Now I'm going to do a little sub exercise on the side here just to show you how you manually create a dataset object. So we've basically made a connection to our database. Now, if I go back to this little arrow, I say choose data source. I'm going to expand other data sources, project data sources. I see here net class dataset, and I see here my tables. So I'm going to choose flight info. And because I chose flight info, look, ID, airline, flight num, destination, airplane type, all showed up. So we haven't written a single line of code, and we're able to make a database connection. Pretty convenient, right? So, in fact, let's do the combo box just to get that out of the way. So this combo box at the top is supposed to take the same data connection, and it's supposed to be able to retrieve the data here too. So if I expand this little arrow, and I check off use data bound items, it says here data source. Let's use, well, it's auto-generated something called flight info binding source for us. So we don't have to go back in and retrieve our data sources. Net class. We don't have to do this because when we can make this connection here with data grid view, it auto-generated a binding source for us called flight info binding source. If I expand that, it has the foreign key relationship there mentioned. Now display member, I'm going to display the flight number to the user, value number. When it comes to selected value, I want to return the ID. Selected value, I'll leave that alone because I think this is trying to force us to a particular selected value to start off with, but we're going to leave that. So we have here our flight number is what's going to be displayed to the user. ID will be the selected value that's sent back, so it's our value member. And our data source is flight info binding source. Now this alone, if we run this, let's see what happens. You should see all of your data from your table, your flight table here. And you should see all of your flight numbers listed in the combo box. And yet we still have not written a single line of code. We've got our form here half running. Pretty convenient. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is configure the airplane type because we forgot to do that. So we're going to hard code the airplane type. So by editing items, and we'll just list out some of the airplanes from before, like Airbus 320. We'll say Boeing 737, Boeing 747, Boeing 777, and Boeing 787. Right, so just the different airplanes. We used these last week. We'll just use them again. Right, and of course, it'd be better to put these into a database table and have a third table in our database. But since we didn't, we'll just hard code them for now. But that could be something to expand upon in the future. Right, this will be our airplanes here that we're going to use. All right. Now the other thing I want to show you before we get into add, update, and delete, which are the remaining things to do, is how can we manually create a data set? So if we need to do this by hand, which may be the case of the reality in the second half of the course when you do web forms, what you would do is you would right click on your project name and go add new item, and you would look for something called a data set. Look for something called data set. I'm going to call it data set 1, and I'll hit add. All right, and this little window pops up. It's actually the data set designer, right? So I need to be able to connect my database to here. So what I want to do is under view, I want to look for something called a Server Explorer. So we want to be able to bring in Server Explorer because we're going to use that to connect to our database. So view, you should have Server Explorer, and that expands here. Now you can expand your data connections. You actually might find it here, but or not. Otherwise, servers, you see your computer name. What we're going to do here is under the plus sign is connect to a database. And this same window pops up, right? The same window pops up. We go through the same motions, connect to our same server name. So because we already did this, we don't have to do this a second time. This is already done for us. But we're just going to go through this exercise of how we would do it this way. So provide our computer name, SQL Server authentication, put in our username and password. I'm going to save my password, select the database name, net class, hit OK, and it will have created a new data connection for me with my computer name.netclass.dbo, right? So if I expand this, I'll see all the same folders that I would have seen in SQL Server, right? And if I expand tables, I'll see flight info and user info. And I can just drag flight info over here. And I can drag user info over here. And you'll see the foreign key relationship generated between the two. So now we have our data set manually created. In fact, let's actually take this data set and let's use this in our code. We're going to use this in our code here. So we have now created an object called dataset1.xsd, a file. We have dragged over our two tables. Now the data structures that are generated here don't take effect until I hit Control S to save this file. So I'm going to hit Control S, and it will automatically generate the methods, objects, and so on needed to get this going here. Now in our project, we actually have two data sets now. We have dataset1.xsd and we have netclass.dataset.xsd. If you don't plan on creating this manually, you could just simply use netclass.dataset.xsd for the code we're about to write. Or in my case, I'm going to use dataset1 as an exercise here. So this is a small little exercise in being able to create a data set manually. It's not necessary because we actually went through the motions already to generate this. Okay, so at this point we have a data set. We've understood the whole concept of data set and getting data to display really easily without even writing a single line of code. Now we're going to write some code to be able to do our add, update, and delete. So going back to our form, so I'm just going to hit Control S just to save this just in case. I'm going to close off my Server Explorer to expand some space there and close off the data set. I'm done with that. Going back to my form, I'm going to start with add. We're going to start by adding a new row to our table here. I'm going to maximize this. And the first thing we're going to do here is learn how to write code that will insert a new row into our table. So the first thing we want to do is we want to check to see if there's any errors that pop up. All right. So what we're going to do here is say if tbairline.text is empty, or tbflight.text is empty, or new line tbdestination.text is empty. Okay. Now I ignored the airplane, and with good reason. With good reason. So we know that by default it'll load up a blank entry for the airplane choice. So let's force it to be the first airplane, so we don't have to worry about any exception being thrown, just like it did last week. So I'm just going to go down to form1 load, and I'm going to say cmb airplane dot selected index is equal to 0, just to force it to be the first airplane on the list. So form load, that's the only thing I'm going to do with form load. The rest of the work will be inside btn add click. Inside this if statement, we'll just put an error message like no text box can be empty. So message box.show. So no text box can be empty. We'll say error. We'll use the message box buttons.ok. I'll use the message box icon dot error. All right, so we'll get that message box to display. Now, otherwise, we can go ahead and try to insert something new here. So I'm going to say else. And what we need to do now is instantiate our data set. Now I have two data sets in this project. So I have data set 1 that we created by hand, and I have net class data set. Right? So I can use either one because they both do the exact same thing. Let's use data set 1 here. So we're going to say data set 1. Now be careful, there's data set and there's data set 1. The difference is that data set is your generic class, right? Data set 1 is your custom class, meaning that we created this by hand, all right, and we drag tables in, so it has customized objects and methods for us. So we're going to use data set 1, all right, and we'll call it ds1 is equal to new data set 1. Okay. Now you could still use net class data set 1. Like you should also have this net class data set. Oops, with a capital N. You should still have this. This is fine. You can use either one. I'm gonna use the other one. So I'm gonna use net data set 1. Now we need another object. It's a table adapter. So again, just to recap, the data set object, data set 1, its purpose is to manage the data itself, right? All the columns, all the rows, right? All that sort of stuff. But we need another object that'll handle transferring data to and from the real database. So this one is a table adapter. So we're going to say we're going to say dataset 1 table adapters, or you would say net class table adapters if you're using that one. But I'm going to use dataset 1 table adapters dot flight info table adapter. So this table adapter is geared directly for the flight info table. I'm going to call it TA flight is equal to new, and it'll autocomplete for me. I'll just put some round brackets at the end. So new dataset 1 table adapters dot flight info table adapter. Okay, so I have my two objects that I'm going to work with for managing the data and transferring data to and from the database. Now, I need to instantiate a new row because I'm going to add a new row. This is the add method, so we're going to add a new row here. So I need to instantiate a row object. So I'm going to say dataset1 dot flight info row. Call it frow is equal to ds1 dot flight info dot new flight info row. This is instantiating a new row object. Notice that all of my names are incorporated into the classes and methods here. Alright? So it's auto-generated all this stuff behind the scenes. Saves a lot of time, a lot of headache here. Okay? So we're instantiating a new row object. Now let's populate this row. It gets really easy from here. So we'll say frow dot airline is equal to tb airline dot text. We've just pulled the airline. Frow dot flight num is equal to tb flight dot text. Frow dot destination is equal to, let it autocomplete, tb destination dot text. Finally, airplane type. So we're going to say frow dot airplane type is equal to cmb airplane dot selected item dot toString. At this point, we've populated our row. Notice that the variables airline, flight num, destination, airplane type, they're all generated based on my table. Right? So it again saved us a lot of headache in coding. No need to worry about any insert into flight info where, you know, this and that. So not creating any queries here. It's done for us behind the scenes. So we have this new row. Let's add it. We're going to add it to our cache copy. So we're going to say ds1 dot flight info dot rows dot add, and we're going to pass in frow. So now this line of code adds it to our cache copy, not the real database, but our cache copy of the database. Okay? So now we have this new row. Whatever we put in here, it's going to go to our cache copy. The next step, and the most important step now, is to flush it back to the real database. All right? So the way we do that is to say ta flight dot update for ds1 dot flight info. At this point, it has been sent back to the server, or it's waiting for a data connection so they can actually send it back to the server. But it's queued for returning back to the database. At that point, this is it. This is all the code we need to insert a new row. All right. It's a little tricky at first because there's some new language here, right? But after a while, when you do enough tables, you get used to this and you understand that this logic is consistent based on whatever the name of your table is and whatever the name of your columns are in your table, right? So it saves you a lot of headache, a lot of issues here. Before we can actually run this and add, is pushed our data back, but we need to refresh. We need to refresh our data grid view and our combo box. So we're gonna call upon the database to provide us with the latest copy of the database. So we're gonna say ta flight dot fill for ds1 dot flight info. At this point, this line fill, this is going back to the real database. It's saying, give me back the latest copy. Even though we just did an update, but here's the thing. It could be that two people at the same time are adding a new flight to the table, right? You want to catch all copies, right, at the same time. So that's why we're going to do a fill to retrieve the latest copy of everything here. And then we're going to refresh our combo box and data grid view. So we'll say CMB flight dot data source is equal to ds1 dot flight info and data grid view 1 dot data source is equal to ds1 dot flight info. And that's it. Now we can actually run this and actually add a new row and watch it actually populate. Okay, so let's run this thing. Okay. So, let's add a new flight here. Let's say Air France. I don't know, FR 322 going to Paris on a Boeing 777. And if I hit add, let's check our combo box. FR322 is there, and our data grid view has a new row, 13 Air France FR322 is there. Now this kind of lets you think, well, maybe we should have put a message up to the user to say, hey, it was added, instead of thinking like, hey, let's check the combo box and the data grid view. So we really should put a message box saying, hey, it was successful. That's another little bit of advice there. And also, we didn't put anything to a try catch. You may have noticed that everything was done here was without a try catch. So you could consider a try catch, but it's optional here. Whereas in the connected world, it was mandatory to put everything to a try catch to catch any errors that were there. So that's the add. So that was add. Now the next thing to do is to do the update. So let's go back here and let's see how update works. It's a very similar approach in code, but there are some differences that we're going to investigate here. So we'll go down to btn update, click this method, and we're going to go ahead and start our update. We're going to start by instantiating those same two objects. So we're going to say dataset1, call it ds1 is equal to new dataset1. Then we'll say create the table adapter. So we'll say dataset1 table adapters dot flight info table adapter ta flight is equal to new, and let it autocomplete. Dataset1 table adapters flight info table adapter. Or just copy and paste from above. Or better yet, make it into a class variable. Another option there. Now here's the thing. We jumped right into creating a new row and adding it in. Because we're doing an update, we need to have the latest copy of the table. All right, so we have to go in and retrieve the latest information. So right off the bat, we're going to do a ta flight.fill, passing in ds1.flightinfo. We're telling it which table to populate. So it's going to go in, retrieve the data for flight info, and it's going to dump it into ds1.flightinfo. All right, so now we've retrieved the latest copy of the table. Now, we need to figure out which row was selected from the combo box at the top to see which one to edit. So we're going to go ahead and retrieve that number. So we're going to say int selected is equal to convert.toInt32 for CMB flight dot selected value. Right? So remember, CMB flight is our combo box that has a list of flights. Its selected values were row IDs. Right? So the row IDs for different flights. And we're going to retrieve that, convert it to an int. Now, we're going to do a select statement to retrieve the row that has the corresponding ID. But we don't have to write any queries here. That's the beauty of it. There's actually a method called select built into the data set that will actually search based on the argument that you provide in the round brackets, and the argument you provide in the round brackets is basically the ID of the row Well, actually, it's basically the where clause. That's what get passed in. So let me show you what I mean. We're gonna say data row dr is equal to ds1.flightinfo dot select. And inside this select method, if I do select with no brackets, it's going to select everything. But if I put something inside the round brackets, it's the where clause. So I want to say where ID is equal to selected. So I want to select just the one row. So ID equals, and then plus selected. So this goes on the other side of the where. Right? That's all I have to do. The method select does all the work, retrieves back a query with a number of rows. Now, because we're going based on ID, we know the ID is unique. There's only going to be one row. That's safe to say. So we'll be dealing with dr of 0 when we do our work here. So let's update that first row. So we're going to say dr of 0 of, and you got to be very careful with the column names. What you type inside these double quotes, if it's wrong, we'll give you an exception, right? It'll crash. So we're going to say dr of 0 of airline, because that's my column name, is equal to tbairline.text. Right? So we're using this approach. We'll say dr of 0 of flight num is equal to tbflight.text. We got dr of 0 of destination is equal to tbdestination.text. And we've got dr of 0 of airplane type is equal to CMB airplane dot selected item dot toString. So at this point, we've taken the row, our cache copy of the row, and we have updated with new information. Okay, so this data row is our local copy. We're done updating it. We've changed every single column with the information that's in the text boxes. And now our job is to flush this back to the real database. So we'll just say taflight.update for ds1.flightinfo. At this point, we're done. We've sent it back to the database. So now the database can actually work with it here. Let's just put in that message box we were talking about earlier. So we'll put in a confirmation message to the user to say, hey, it worked. So let's just say messagebox.show for saying flight updated. We'll say confirmed. We'll put in our two messagebox_buttons.ok and messagebox_icon.information. And I'll put this on a new line. There. Now, just because we've updated, we're done, we still have to refresh our data. So we're going to go through those final three steps we went through in the add, which was to fill and then to refresh the data sources for the CMB flight and data grid view 1. So we're going to say taflight.fill for ds1.flightinfo and CMB flight dot data source is equal to ds1.flightinfo and data grid view 1 dot data source is equal to ds1 dot flight info. And that's it. You can actually run this and try and update one of your rows. Alright, so I'm going to choose the Air France line that we just entered. I'm going to change it to KLM. Let's say its flight is KL 909, destination Amsterdam. And we'll put it on a Boeing 787. And I'll hit update. And it says flight updated. And let's just verify that by looking back at our data grid view. We see the last line is now KLM. And we see that the top line, the combo box here now has KL 909. So it's updated the data for us accordingly. So now we've done an add and we've done an update. And now the next step, the final step, is to do a delete. So now let's get into doing the delete method. So let's scroll down to btn delete. And we're going to call up our two objects again. So we'll say dataset1 ds1 is equal to new dataset1. And then we'll call up our table adapter object. So dataset1 table adapters dot flight info table adapter. Call it TA flight. It's equal to new dataset1 table adapters dot flight info table adapter. Right, so we got our two objects that we need. Now, similar to the update, we need to go in and actually request the latest copy of the database before we can work on it. So we'll do our fill again. So we're going to say TA flight dot fill, passing in ds1 dot flight info. Alright, so now we've got the latest copy of our database table cached into our system here. We're going to follow the same step as the update. We're going to request the ID number of what was selected from the combo box. So we'll say int selected is equal to convert dot toInt32 for CMB flight dot selected value. Okay. So nothing different from the update yet. In fact, you'll find that most of this code will be almost identical to the update. Now we have our ID number. Let's do a select. Let's select the row that we want to delete. So we're going to say data row dr is equal to ds1 dot flight info dot select. And inside select, our where clause. So where ID equals and then plus selected. Right? So now we have the row number. And again, like with the update, ID is unique. So we're only expecting one row back, but it's still an array. It'll be an array of one item. So our first row that comes back is the row we expect to delete. So we're just going to say dr of 0. Now there's a method to delete. So we'll say dot delete. Right? That's it. It's deleted it. So it's going to do the heavy lifting of delete from table where ID is something. Right? That's it. It's going to do the work for us. Now all we do is push it back to the server. We say TA flight dot update for ds1 dot flight info. And now the database has it. So at this point, our delete's done. It's just cleanup for us now. So cleanup meaning the message box that'll say, hey, we're done. We've confirmed it's deleted. And also to refresh our grid view and our combo box. So same code as above. we're just going to say messagebox.show. We'll say flight deleted, put like confirmed, and then we'll have message box buttons dot OK and message box icon dot information. Now let's refresh the two controls. So we'll say ta_flight.fill just to refresh our copy of the database. So ds1.flightinfo, and then we'll say cmb flight.dataSource is equal to ds1.flightinfo, and datagridview1.dataSource is equal to ds1.flightinfo. And now we're done. Now you can try out the delete and try deleting a row in your table. So now I'm going to take that last flight we have, the KLM one, and I'm going to delete it. Flight deleted. And let's just verify that. It's no longer in my grid view. It's no longer in my combo box. So at this point we've done an insert, update, and delete. Now, before we stop, there's actually one other thing I'd like to do, and that is to look at one bit of convenience that users expect. And that is that, whenever we want to update something, we're expected to select something from here, but usually as a user you might expect these text boxes to be populated, right? So why don't we go ahead and actually add that convenience to our user, that little bit of, to make the user experience that much better. So I'm going to close this up. What we need to do is add an event handler to that combo box. So let's do this. Going back here, I'm going to double click on the combo box up here at the top. It's going to create the CMB flight selected index change method. We're going to follow the motions for the update. Basically all the update code except for the very end, we're going to follow that. What we're going to do now is just call up our two dataset objects. So we'll say dataset1 ds1 is equal to new dataset1, and we'll say dataset1 table adapters dot flight info table adapter equals ta flight, ta flight is equal to new dataset1 table adapters dot flight info table adapter. Right, so we got our two objects that we need. Now we'll do a fill to retrieve the latest copy from the database. So we'll say ta flight dot fill for ds1.flightinfo. We'll retrieve the ID number for the item selected from the combo box. So we'll say int selected is equal to convert.toInt32 for cmb flight.selected value. Okay. Now we'll use our select statement to do the select for that particular row based on that ID number. So we'll say data row dr is equal to ds1.flightinfo.select, where ID equals and then plus selected. All right, at this point we're going to deviate from our update method. We're going to deviate from our update method in just a little bit because what we're doing now is we just want to retrieve the information and populate our text boxes. So we're going to do the reverse of what we did for the update method. Instead of saying dr of 0 of airline is equal to tb airline, we're just going to take that, reverse that, and have the opposite going. So we're going to say now tb airline dot text is equal to dr of 0 of airline. But just to be on the safe side, dot toString. We're not sure about the data type that's returned. It could be a generic type. That might cause a problem. We'll do the same for flight number, so we'll say tb flight dot text is equal to dr of 0 of flight num dot toString. Do the same for destination, so tb destination dot text is equal to dr of 0 of destination dot toString. All right. Finally, the combo box. So we'll say cmb airplane dot selected item is equal to dr of 0 of airplane type dot toString. And that's it. You can try that. You don't need to update anything. You don't need to run anything else. This is our selected index changed method. So we can actually run this, and we should see the updated values in our text boxes. So now if you select any of the different airlines, you should see your items populate in the text boxes and the combo box. All right, and so this was an exercise in using the disconnected model of the data set. We learned how to make a connection. We learned how to write zero code and be able to connect to our data grid view, to be able to connect to our combo box and display that information. We learned how to do an insert and update delete using the disconnected model. We found it's a lot easier to do, a lot less work than the connected model, a lot less heavy lifting to do on our part. And we learned about the different objects that are generated from the data set itself. And so next our homework would be to actually take this approach and do the same thing for the user table.